top economists, or sometimes people like PhD students that did such a good paper and became so famous economists later on. This will also be in some of my lectures. Because it's important for you to know that maybe in the future people are going to study your papers. Okay, so first of all, what is the aim of my classes? So I want to share with you the things I have learned in so many years that I am an economist. And so I will focus especially on giving you solid knowledge of what I call household economics. And also I will focus especially on new approaches and new methods. So I'm not going to repeat the things that maybe you've already seen in the textbook of economics, but I'm going to push your knowledge a little bit farther. And what I want to do also with this overview of the classes I will teach you is that I wanted you also get familiar with the kind of research that people are doing, which can be like a topic of a master dissertation, a topic of PhD, or if you are already a lecturer, maybe some research papers. So I also want you to learn the techniques, the tools, to get familiar with the type of approaches these people are using. And of course, I'm not going to give this in a very technical manner, but then if you're interested, you can go further, you know, and you can learn the harder part of it. So I hope that my lectures are going to be of accessible level to everyone and interesting for people at different stages, from the undergraduate to the lecturer level. Okay, so let me give you an overview of the topics. So these are these 8 topics that I'm going to cover in the next lectures. And so the first is today is going to relate to household production and economic growth. So I'm not going to say much about that because I will talk about this in 5 minutes. Then next topic is very much related because time use is how people use their time. And so I'm going to give you more on the basics of these models of time use and data and application. And the third lecture is again on the same kind of area because about leisure time. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more on this also in the next few slides, giving you an overview of these topics. But the important thing is the lecture 4, which is on Friday morning, is going to be on remote work. So you know that during the pandemic, everyone was obliged to work from home. And so after the pandemic, many people are now like to continue to work from home at least part of the time. So at least in Europe and OECD nowadays, 1/3 of the workers are working at least a day per week. So 103 workers works at least a day per week from home. So this topic is becoming very important. On the other hand, there is very little literature on this topic. So first I thought I was going to give 2 talks on work from home. One in the morning of Friday and the other in the afternoon of Friday. But then I realized that there is too few literature in this topic to give 2 interesting talks. So I made it very, very interesting and very relevant, and I am including very new papers as well, but it's only going to be in the morning. And the afternoon of Friday is going to focus on the related topic, because you see there is a part on labor supply of work from home. So in the afternoon of Friday, we're really going to look at female labor supply and women in the labor market and gender norms. So that is also a very, very important topic. I will give you some more insights. And then, so that's the only change, that all the work from home is going to be in Friday morning, and Friday afternoon will be gender norms. And what does it mean, gender norms? You know, how does it affect women's participation in the labor market? And then the 6th lecture is on gender quotas. And there are advantages and disadvantages of gender quotas. Gender quotas means that we oblige some spots to be reserved for women. So if we had like gender quotas here, we don't need them because more than 50% of the audience is already women, I think. But in other cases, we go to classroom classrooms and we only find male students, and then we say, where are the women? Why should they be here? Maybe they don't want to be here. We should not force them. Maybe we should help them, give some quotas, reserve some positions for women. And then in lecture 7, these are next week, is going to be methodological. So new methods, which are called correspondence studies, answering vignette, and implicit association tests. These are research methods in the social sciences. They were developed by psychologists and have been used by economists, sociologists, and so forth. And are very, very nice methods for behavioral economics research. So for research on how people behave in the labor market and also in the finance market and in other circumstances. And then the final lecture is about women in academia, women professors, women in economics, and also there will be a part about Claudia Goldin. So maybe you know that Professor Claudia Goldin is the winner of Nobel Prize in Economics this year. And so I gave a special talk in my university about her. So I'm also including some of the material in the last lecture. So to give you a brief overview of the topics I'm going to talk on this 8th lecture, this is one of the basic ideas, because we are talking about uses of time, especially in the first lectures of this today, tomorrow, and also about the leisure time. And the idea is that time is very valuable. So in the economics model, we have a lot of stress on money. You know, people do things because of money. They take decisions under budget constraints. They have wages. But time is also very important. And you know, because you're sitting here today, and maybe if you were not here, what would you do? Maybe you would prepare for an exam, maybe you would prepare for a lecture, maybe you would relax. You know, I'm not sure, because you seem very hard worker. But time is also very important. So in the type of models that we're gonna consider, we're gonna see how do economists, how do social scientists, because also sociologists have worked a lot on time. How do we incorporate time into the picture? It is really relevant. So we can talk about the opportunity cost of time, and in addition to the budget constraint, there is also a time constraint. You know, I can make more money if I decide to be, for instance, a business economist instead of an economist. I can probably make more money if I'm successful, but I cannot increase my time. I only have 24 hours. So if I work for 20 hours a day, I will have very little time left for sleeping and rest and for my family. And maybe someone will complain that you did not cook the dinner or it was not nice enough. And maybe the kids will not like the food because it was burned. So, you know, there are a few constraints. So time is very important also for economists, which is what I'm going to show you. Because the selection of the study that I will present to you with this time use approach is published in the best journal in economics. So the paper I'm going to show you are selection of paper by, you know, top journal in economics and top economists, and also some of my study that so there is a mixture of different studies. Then there is how individuals allocate their time. This picture is provocative because what we're going to see in the lectures is why do women take on board all the household, most of the household work burden, but then men can also do this, as you can see in these pictures, that the picture is provocative on purpose. Then, but what is important is actually that this model of household work I used to explain why women are spending all the time doing what these men are doing in the pictures. So, but some men are also becoming more involved. And why does it matter? Because how people spend the time together, there is some literature that shows, and I think you also will agree with me, the leisure time is also very important for our productivity at work. Like if you don't sleep, if you don't take some breaks, you're probably not going to be working very well after a little time. Your productivity is going to decline. And also if you spend family time together with the family, is also very important with the children, you know. So the presence of the mother is great, but the father is also very important for the children. It helps children often. Some studies try to evaluate whether both the father time and the mother I'm not going to look into that literature. There is very little literature in this area, but I can tell you more if you are interested. Here I will focus more on the leisure time and productivity. Then I'm going to talk about the work from home. I already told you about this, about the COVID-19 pandemic. And some of the open questions are, when people work from home, are they more productive, or are they ending up doing childcare and sleeping longer? So we're going to look in the economic literature where they studied the productivity effects, but also the effects on the labor supply of women. For instance, we're going to look at some studies for America, for the US, but also for India, where the fact that you can work from home made women participate more in the labor market and increased female labor supply. So we're going to look at those questions. And I think I am done with the overview. So the other message is that some of the models underlying the lectures I'm going to give you are built on the idea that I am an individual, but whether I am married and who is my husband is also going to affect my labor market, the participation, the hours I work, whether I have children, and many things about the family. Sometimes even extended family with more people in the family is also going to affect the economic decisions of people and outcomes for the economy. Okay, so yes, and so finally, the part which is the part about the gender norms, to give you an idea, the norms are rooted in the culture of people. So the gender norms are somehow similar all over the world under certain, like if I look, and I will give you example in the next lecture, the hours of time that the women in Indonesia on average are spending doing household work are the same on average in Europe, in the US, in Australia. Some patterns are all the same all over the world. And then each country has some specific gender norms. And some are part of cultural norms. Like I'm talking to you, you see my hand is, and I can move, if I don't have the microphone, I would move both hands. So I prefer not to have a microphone so I can move both my hands because it's part of my culture, you know. But if you have other professors from other countries, they will be much more, they will never use this hands culture. So there is a culture which determines norms, and especially for gender is very important. At some time in the past, when you were not born, I wasn't born, women did not have the right to study. They could not go into the same colleges as men. It was forbidden, not even in the United States. Some of the fields were only open to men, and they could not go to work. If they were married, they had to be housewife. It was compulsory, you know. So nowadays, people are studying gender differences in the labor market, but if you go back in time, lots of progress has also been made. And all these are parts of the gender norms. So the gender norms of today, they are not the same of centuries ago. But it's very interesting to understand outcomes. So here I was giving you an example that when people are doing some studies, they find that the women behave somewhat different than men. For instance, are maybe more reserved, or in public they are more shy and they have less competition, less strong in competition. But then there are also many other studies that find that when you are, for instance, a woman and you are a doctor, you have to be much better than your colleagues to have many patients and to be a well-reputed doctor. So we're going to look at some studies on Friday afternoon, where, for example, this is a super interesting study. Who is coming on Friday afternoon? Do you know already or not? So I will tell you this very brief extract from this study, which was done by an American woman for her PhD job market paper. So she finished her PhD, and this was the paper with which she went on the job market to get a job offer. And I think she was a student from some very good university in the US, maybe Harvard, but I'm not 100% sure. So in this paper, she's taken administrative data. So data that is not survey data, is really administrative data with records on the doctors, the surgeons, people that do surgery interventions in the United States. And she looked at a very bad type of surgery where the patient dies. So there is this person in a hospital, there is a very serious surgery, and the outcome is bad because the patient does not survive. And she distinguished when the surgeon was a woman and when the surgeon was a man. So when the surgeon is a woman, people think that she makes a mistake. So once the patient is dead, it's very bad because she loses patients. The doctors don't recommend to her their patients anymore. And actually they stop sending patients also to other female surgeons. So even the other female surgeons, that they have nothing to do with that, they have statistically fewer patients that get recommended for surgery to them. But if you are a man and this happened, everyone thinks that the case was a very difficult case and the surgery was very difficult, so they make excuses, I believe, because they are going to keep sending you the patients. So in this study, which will come out on some economic journal review of economic studies, I think, very in these days, in this study she had this incredible paper with evidence, which is about gender norms and stereotypes that people have, I'm sure they don't do on purpose, but from her data analysis, so not survey question, but really the data, it shows that if a man surgeon has a bad ending surgery intervention in an hospital, people keep sending them patients, but if it's a woman, she loses a lot of the patients. So if you are a woman professional, you have to be very good and very much perform very well. So you have to be performing even better than the men, so that everyone can, that you do not have these adverse effects. So this is the end of the overview, because this is the Friday lecture and the work from home lecture, and next week lecture is also about the quotas and women's in leadership. So the next couple of lectures, the last two next week, will focus on quotas. So in many countries, like also in India, there is some compulsory, and I'm not sure about Indonesia, but in the politics, you have some of the political positions that are reserved only for women. And in the company boards, nowadays in Europe, in most countries, 40% of the company board have to be women. So what are the effects of these quota policies? What happened? Did it change anything? So this is the topic of that lecture. There are many studies that examine those companies and try to evaluate whether there is an effect on the company performance or not. Okay, and so the final one is about women in economics, and I already told you about that. So if you don't have question on the overview, I'm going to start with today's lecture. Okay? So today's lecture is about household production and economic growth. So what we're going to look at is why do women specialize in household production? Does it change if you have technological progress? So there is also technological progress that comes into play. When households get electricity, running water, less time is needed to do some of the household tasks. So if women were doing a lot of the household tasks, now they can go and work to the labor market. And how does it contribute to the economic growth of the country? So we're going to see some evaluation of how household production can be taken into account into economic growth, but also we're going to look at what happens during recessions. During economic recessions, people lose jobs. Very often it is men that lose jobs, so these men are they doing more household work then because they have more time available, or they're doing more leisure time. And what are the implications of economic recessions, but also expenditure and consumption. So an important part of this lecture, which is also in some of my coming slides, is about consumption and expenditure, because when we analyze consumption data, this comes from private expenditure. But if I have very little money, maybe instead of buying something, I'm going to produce it in my house. And then you will look at expenditure data and you may think that I don't have maybe the money to eat, but actually maybe I have also important to take into account that production into the picture, and that's what some of the studies are doing. Okay, so these are two papers that we see today. One is by a group of, there are three men, they are all, so for your interest, Eric Hurst and Lucas Caravagonis are economics professors at Chicago University, and Eric Hurst was also the editor of the Journal of Political Economy, that is one of the top worldwide journal in economics for quite some years. So they're really, really established professors in the US, and they are macroeconomists, the three of them. And Mark Ager is a professor of economics also at Princeton University. So there are these three men, and especially the first two, Ager, Mark, and Eric Hurst, will also be the authors of the paper on consumption and expenditure. So they have done, some of their research is on completely other topics, but some of their research is also the one we're going to study today, which is about using time and household work. And now we're going to look at Valérie Ramy. So again, Valérie Ramy is a macroeconomist. She's one of the top women macroeconomists in the United States, actually. She's in the board of the economists of the American Economic Association. She's at Stanford University these days. She has done a work also on time use. Most of her work is on completely other topics, you know, like business cycle, really macroeconomics topics. But she has worked on the time use of the Americans, and she has estimated historical data on how much time people were spending on household production. Okay, so these are the main references for today. And also, if you want the paper, I can also make the original paper. So these are also famous economists, so I have also their photos. They worked on time use, because sometimes it's nice to see what they look like, these people, then we read all their work. So Daniel Hammermesh, he has written, so if you are interested in time use, he has even books, you know, books that you can buy on Amazon about time is a scarce resource, how to use your time, and he's a very well-known American economist. Valérie Ramy, I just mentioned her. Patricia Apps is actually in Australia. And this photo is when she was younger, so she is maybe retired these days. She used to be at Sydney University, and she was working especially on taxation and time use, because you can also relate the income taxation to how much time people are spending on labor supply or non-market work. Eric Hurst, I just told you about him, is a Chicago economist. I just selected a few of them. Gary Baker is in the center, because Gary Baker is a Chicago economist, a Nobel Prize. He's the author of Treaty and the Marriage, what's the name of it? Treaties of the Family, yes. And he's one of the first economists that started to work on family economics, and he also was the first one to start to work on time use. And he defined leisure time, for example. He said, what is leisure time? Leisure time is something you cannot delegate to someone else. You know, market work, I could have someone do the work for me. Household work, I can have some maids or some people do the work for me. By my leisure time, I have to take it myself. If I go to sleep, I cannot pay someone to sleep for me. So Gary Baker is contributed a lot to the time use literature and to the household economics models. But of course, in all these models, the woman always, but it was very important because all the economic models, most of the time, they only talk about the economic agent, and this economic agent was implicitly always the household head, always the husband, always the man. And there was no space for women in the economics model until Gary Baker gave them a place. But then all these models said that women had to specialize in household work. So, but it was still very nice, because then people started to say, well, but we can modify Baker model, and we can also have women specialize also in market work. So it was very important, and of course, a Nobel Prize economist. And Robert Pollack is also a household economist from St. Louis University, lots of work on household economic theory. So let's go to the heart now of economics after this introduction. Okay, so what's happening in the economics model? So as you have, we have lecturers, but we have also undergraduate people in this room. You probably have never seen time use in any of the undergraduate economics models. Because the economic model is all about, for instance, let's take a labor market model. We have a labor supply. People decide how much hours to work in the labor market under the budget constraint, and they're going to trade off between leisure and market work. So actually, in that labor supply model, leisure time, if you have data, the leisure time is often never measured because leisure time in that model includes sleep, household work. You're studying here, you are doing leisure because you're not in the labor market, so you're not education, you're doing leisure. So it is a very nice model. I'm not criticizing the labor supply model, but I'm just saying that with the time use economics and household production economics, we are going to give more connotation, and we're going to say leisure of the, you're trading off leisure and labor, but leisure is not all what you call leisure. It also includes childcare, it also includes domestic production, but it also includes education time. So we can do models of production of education and investment in education. And so, what is the evolution from this model is also important because when we take into account not only the paid work but also the leisure time and the other uses of time, then we can also better grasp what are the consequences for productivity and for well-being, also non-monetary well-being, you know. And also time spent in education can have a specific approach in which we don't just look at what is the degree you're studying, but we can also look at how much time are you spending on that education. If you do this, these are very difficult models of investment in education and what are the outcomes. And then the childcare time of parents is also very important. You can put it into theoretical models where you look at parents spending time with their children and how does it affect the educational outcomes. It is very important for children's outcomes to have some time. They don't need to have a full-time parents, but some time for their parents is very important. So these are all important dimensions that we are going to take into the picture. Sleep time is very important, so there are some papers about sleep and productivity. And then the most important message is how do we take this time into the economic model. So what we are going to do is that we're going to use the wage. The wage is going to give you an idea of how costly it is to take leisure time. So if we take the labor supply model, in which I can choose how many hours I work, I may end up working more and more and more and more to be more productive, to produce more research paper, to get more invitation like to Indonesia to come back again. But at one point I'm going to be exhausted. So there is a trade-off between, but my opportunity cost of time is going to be my wage. So normally in these models, people are going to use the wage that people have in the labor market to see how costly it is. So if I am a very important, imagine, business sector owner of a company, I should not spend a lot of time doing the household work and the childcare, because if I would spend all that time in the market, I will have a much larger income, you know. So my opportunity cost of time depends on my wage from the paid work. And this is why the models of household production of Baker were predicting that women should specialize in the household work. Because especially at the time that Baker was writing his models, very few women were in the labor market and their wages were often not very high because they were in low educated jobs in the labor market. So if you compare the wage of the husband, he was often earning more than the wife. And so if you have someone that has to do the household work, it would be costly for the household to have the husband do the household work and not the wife. So in the economic calculation, you take these two wages of the people into account, and you calculate the comparative advantages and specialization. And then, of course, the picture has changed because as women are more participating in the labor market, and in some couples, even women are earning more money than the husband, then people ask, but then why is the husband not doing the household work? Because there are the gender norms that are going to complete the picture. And so, this is, and also, of course, there are children and giving birth and all these other things that are important for women too. So, the old wage is used in the model to evaluate the opportunity cost of time. So, I don't know whether, like in the photo, this woman with the clock, is she sleeping or laughing? Is she tired now that she's worked too much, or is she laughing? I think she's laughing. Okay. So maybe she has more time and she studied enough as a student. So, so the value of time is very important also for your, the cost of time and how you spend your time is important also for well-being. But then there is another estimate. So here I could say, taking this idea that from the labor supply model that people can choose how many hours to work, I can trade off between labor market and leisure or unpaid household work. But then imagine that now I want to give a value also to the household production. Okay? So imagine that I spend every day various hours taking care of my children when I come back home from work, and I want to value my unpaid household work. If I give my wage, that's going to value much more than if I give the wage of a babysitter. That is often people that are less qualified. So there is these two differences. If I am considering a model of people choosing between different time uses, the opportunity cost of time is the wage of the person. But if we're going to try to value what is the contribution of this unpaid economy, or the care economy, we should not give the wage of the person that is doing that activity, but we should give the wage of what you would pay someone else to do that activity. So there is a famous example by Daniel Hammermesh, economist of time use, that he has this example of a colleague of his that in his house there was a problem with the water leak. So his colleague, that was another professor of economics, spent like one full day trying to repair the leak, you know, and finally he succeeded. But it took him like 8 hours or 10 hours. And so he said, if I evaluate that work with his wage, it means that he's spending a fortune to repair the water leak. But actually, if he had paid a specialist, a plumber, first of all, the plumber would only have spent 1 hour, maybe half an hour, and not 8 hours. And second, they probably would cost much less than this salary of economics professor. So this is one issue, and that's also why when people are evaluating the value of this household production, there is a bit of estimates that can vary a lot because there are two issues. First of all, if I want to give a value, I have to give the value of the plumber for the wage of the plumber and not the wage of that professor. And second, there is how efficiently are people doing things. So with time use, a big challenge is that I cannot see the output. I cannot measure the output. If I'm spending 1 hour to cook a meal, I know I spent 1 hour to cook a meal. I can give maybe a wage of some housing assistant or maids instead of my wage for that 1 hour of work. But how do I value if the meal was good or bad into the picture? That's not possible. So with the household production model, one big challenge, you have very, very complicated theoretical models with lots and lots of equations. But the big challenge is that you don't observe, you can't monetarize the output. So very often it's very hard to identify these models. So let me give you an idea of the estimates. So I said to you that there is the wage of the doctor and the wage of the person that prepared it. So I look at the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation. So the APEC in 2022, there is a report which is on the website, which is called Unpaid Care and Domestic Work Counting the Cost. And there you find this estimate, and you find that in the APEC countries, the value of unpaid household works is equivalent to 5.5% of the GDP of the country, that's the lowest estimate, up to 41% of the GDP of the country. So when you will find this in the literature, you will find this type of estimates in reports. They try to evaluate how much would it cost if that unpaid household work was done by paid people specialized maybe in certain tasks instead than by the other individuals who do this unpaid. So how can we value it in terms of contribution to GDP? Because people are spending a lot of time, especially in the care economy. Nowadays, I guess it's the same in Indonesia, but nowadays in Europe, all the governments are worried because there is, in the care economy, who is caring of these for the older people, you know? Who is caring for the children? They have facilities, public facilities, often also private facilities, but caring for the older person is still a lot relying on the relative and the family, and it's very costly for the state when the relatives cannot assure that care. So, if you start valuing a lot of this care provided, household work, not just care, but also cooking, cleaning, shopping, a lot of this work is also done by men. And it comes to 5 to 40% of the GDP. But why are the estimates varying so much from one country to the other? Well, it varies a lot because in countries which are, I think there is a lot of, first of all, it could be in the data, so it could be data accuracy, but it's also that in some countries where people, for instance, if women are not working in the labor market, if they're working less, they're going to spend more time in household work and in care, so maybe you get this estimate that it corresponds to 40%. Then maybe you're going to take other countries, maybe, I'm not sure if it's the case, which country where women are working a lot and they all have maids. So maids are in the market, they're going to be paid. So it's not valuing the unpaid household work, because that's the household work you pay someone to do that. So then you will maybe get a 5% of the GDP is unpaid household work contribution in countries where they have lots of household services and the female labor supply is more important. And this is the other side of the medal. If we take the average for all I think the ILO, International Labour Office, tries to make estimates which are for like general picture, averaging more developed and less developed economically country, they get that unpaid household work, so this includes also care work, corresponds to 9% of the GDP, so $11 trillion. So there is really an economic meaning to this part of the economy, which is often not so much spoken about. And the women's contribution to this GDP is about 6.6%, and the men's contribution is 2.4% of the GDP. So men are also contributing to this unpaid household work economy. You know, men do some childcare, men do some household work. We should not always think that they don't do anything. Their contribution is also important economically. And so this is just a general picture. And if we look at the hours that people spend on these things, so again I took this figure from the 2022 report of the APEC. And in this region, women spend on average 4.5 hours every day doing unpaid care and household work. And I can tell you that the picture is very, very similar for Europe. And men, they spend 1/3 of that. So for men, it's more or less 1 hour and a half, a bit less than 1 hour and a half per day. But it's still non-negligible, you know, 1 hour and a half per day. And this impact also varies a lot. These estimates vary a lot, of course, by the socioeconomic status of people, because often more educated women have a more important participation in the labor market, so they will contribute less to the unpaid household work. Okay, but this is just to say that this is a very important contribution to the economy. And then, also in the other issue is fertility, you know, because in some countries, like in some countries, people don't have kids anymore, so the governments are desperate because they are forecasting that their future balances for expenditure and taxes are going to be very negative in the future because there will be no kids to pay for the future, for the assistance, the care, the health system, the education system. There are going to be very few children. So in countries where there are more children, of course people have to spend more time in childcare than in countries where fertility is lower. So that also explains the big differences in that contribution of the unpaid household work to the economy, which varied from 5% to 40% across different countries. And so, if we look at the Indonesian Times User Surveys, I also found this one, especially for you, but now I will keep it in my slides and teach also to people in France. So, in the Indonesian Times User Surveys, the men spend 1.5 times more time on paid employment than women. So you see that compensates the picture. So men are spending more time in the labor market, and women are spending more time on unpaid domestic work and child care. But it's not really a well-balanced picture. So you have a lot of the literature that is more, I think, by sociologists about the women's double burden, but there are also a few papers by economists. So women are working in the labor market, but then they keep doing a lot of the unpaid household work. So they call it a double burden, because the difference is that, yes, men are working 1.5 times more in the labor market, but women are working 3 times more in the household work. You know, but of course these are differences, averages. So when you look at averages, there are a lot of things behind that, because these are just averages. But if the participation rate, so this is times, but the participation rate is very important. Because of course, if 50% of the women are housewives, then maybe, you know, this explains these differences. Okay, but when you are counting the market hours and the household work, this is Indonesia, women are working every day. So this is called the total work. So this guy, Daniel Hammerbush, has a paper with some co-authors on total work all over the world, because he wanted to show that when you add up market work and unpaid household work and care, men and women are doing the same, which is what he shows in his book. But all the feminist economists are angry with that conclusion, because no one wants to believe that if you add the market work and the unpaid household work is the same. We know that women do more. We know that there is this double burden. So you see 2 hours extra in Indonesia. So that confirms our intuition on the gender norms. Okay, so this is a picture from Europe. So here we have these ones, you don't see which country it is, because I took it from the web, and this title it comes on the country's name, but these are all European countries. And you can see the blue line are the women, and the yellow are the men. So if we look at the household work done by men and women in this country, you see that the blue line is often going toward 4.5 hours, which was the Indonesian case. So the hours of household work are very similar, unpaid household work by Indonesian women and European women are very much similar, you know. And this is the Americans' time use survey. So here is about participating, you know. So this, when we look at the averages, we are not taking into account that in some activities people are not participating or not participating in the same way. So if we take this last one, for example, this one is repair works. So the blue here in this picture is the total population, the red are men and the green are women. So now we're going to look at the repair work, you know? Because unpaid household work also include the repair works. So for instance, I have an economist, a colleague in Paris, that is famous, in Paris is famous for household economics theory, and he really wants to do a paper on the fact that low-income households, men are spending a lot of time doing the repair works themselves, and in high-income households, you can pay someone to come and repair your house. Because he said that he was always impressed by his neighborhood, that he lives in a neighborhood which is in a poor area, in a mixed area of Paris, and so he sees that always his neighbors are doing all the works themselves, and he's instead maybe just reading the newspaper in the garden because he pays someone to do those repair works. And so he thinks that this is a very important dimension of inequality that economists should also look at. This, so this repair work completely fits the picture that this is only the participation rate. Why do we see so little, so few? If we will see more of these things in the next lecture, which is more about the empirics and the data. When we look at this data, this comes from a time use survey. People are asked to fill a diary for 24 hours and to say how much time they spend in the past 24 hours on different activities. So you don't do repair works every day. So if you use this type of surveys, repair works, but also care for elder person, often it gives you a very small, it's not representative of the full picture, because it's just a given day. So a given day is representative for market work, for childcare, cooking, shopping. It's not going to be representative for things that you do only once a week or once a month, frequently. You need specific surveys. But we can get the picture that men do all of it and women very little. This is also garden and care, especially men. Household management, it was interesting that in the US, the women also do a lot of household management activities, the participation. If you look at the laundry, because this laundry is a famous activity that gender norms. Some people in economics, I have some colleagues that did experiments in labs, making couples do different tasks, because men have apparently a problem with doing the laundry, so they always let their wife do the laundry. But this is one area in which gender norms are important, and they also have always economic value. So we can discuss this later when we do the gender norms. But it's not just that men don't want to do the laundry. What I can see is that very often women will not let them do the laundry. You say, no, you're going to destroy all my nice clothes by putting it at 60 or 100 temperature, you know. So if women don't help this husband by telling them, here is how you do the laundry, it's very easy, you can do it. But they say, no, don't do this, don't do this. I mean, how can we complain that they don't do the laundry? So the laundry is a specific, very important thing for gender norms. Because gender norms, also women have gender norms. So when I talk about my lecture, I never make it a battle of men against women or women against men, because we are all here here is just a classroom, but in the society, this is not a battle. Everyone has to decide. But also you have to be aware that the norms, women also have norms. So sometimes women do so much household work because they want to do this. Other times, no, there is someone that doesn't want to do it on the other side. But there are many studies in economics that also focus on women. They make a career in Scandinavian countries, like Swedish women and Danish women. And they find this amazing thing that the more the woman earns, the more she's doing unpaid household work, because she wants to prove to the husband that even if she's making a career, she is a woman. So she wants to show these gender norms, and she wants to be integrating with these gender norms that the women have to do most of the household work. So gender norms are a very interesting area for behavioral economics, because all of us, we have all these gender norms, and on the other hand, now in the next slides, I go to the, so laundry, women do all of it. This is all really clearly stereotypes and gender norms. Food preparation and cleanup, you go again, the green line, women. So what is the, these lines, they tell you, they take these percentages that are easy to read. So the total unpaid household work, including care, repairs, laundry, cooking, shopping, and so on. You see that very few people, 100% participation. So it means that on the day, this survey is representative, so it's a random sample representative of the population. On a representative day, most of the women have spent some positive time, so they participated in unpaid household work. It's a bit like the counter picture of the participation rate in the labor market, okay? So the participation in the labor market is probably around 80–90% for men, and maybe 60 to 70%, 65% for women. And the participation in unpaid household work is almost 100% for women, and also very high, like 90%, no, the red line is men, so 80%. About 80% of men have done at least some household work. It does not say how much, but maybe they have bought, they shopped for food, maybe they contributed to some of the childcare, and so forth. And then as you go and look into detailed activities, the participation rates, so if you look at the detailed activity, participation rates are much lower. So this way you will also know when you do research, if you do research on any of these topics, you have to be very careful. If you look at the aggregate, you have that many people participated and you can study that. But if you start taking activities where no one did it on the journal, on the survey, you maybe don't want to do a paper only on that activity. You can include that into the picture, but it should not be a paper talking only about something where you have very few data. So this is just about data application. So, okay, let's get to the counter picture. So this is still a bit introduction, so maybe I'm going too slow. I can accelerate. Yes, because, but we still have enough time. So my lecture is until 4, is that right? Yes, so we still have time. Do you find it, you can follow? Yes, okay. So we're going to get now into, further into the picture, so you now know the elements. Now the picture is technological progress. So some of the models in this area, they're looking at technological progress. So what happens with technological progress and household production? So it means there is electricity, so I have a refrigerator, I have a washing machine, I have a dishwasher. So women need to spend less time in household production, and now they can spend more time into the labor market. So there is this very famous paper written by a group of co-authors that are all men. I'm always interested in this literature to see that there are many men that contribute to the literature, because very often my students, they came to ask me, okay, professor, I'm interested in your topic, but is this only women's topics? I said, no, there are a lot of men economists also working on this topic. It's open to everyone. So this group of economists, they published in 2005 in the Review of Economic Studies, and they called their paper Engines of Liberation. Because they show that the fact that there are these increases, so they take historical data for the United States, and they're looking, so in this one is the adoption percentage by households so from 1850 to 1850 to 2000, you see that we go into the adoption rate 100%. When we get to 2000, we have almost 100% here. They have, what is the 100% line? Is flush toilets, running water, electricity. But if you take central heating, then even in the 2000 it's still very high, but it's 80% of the households in the US that will have central heating. Then if we get to these various consumer goods which can be helpful for doing cooking and household work, you see that we take the dishwasher. The dishwasher. So this is refrigerator. 100% of households by 1980 had a refrigerator. A microwave is still only 60%. You don't have 100% of households that have a microwave. If you look at the dryer, that's also 40–50%. If you look at dishwasher, 40–50% of the household. Often dishwasher was really the category which only some households can afford a dishwasher. And then the vacuum cleaner, everyone had it. So they argue that this increase in household appliances over time, and it can be seen also as applied investment into the GDP ratio. So they're going to relate it to GDP. So they say, so as GDP, the economy grows and households are richer, people have more appliances. And then they argue that this explains a lot of the increase in labor supply. So they're also taking the maids into some of the picture here, the homemakers. So again, they have the data from the beginning of the 1900 until 1980, and they're looking at these domestics, so people that have maids, they go down. So the hours per week worked by maids go down from 60 to less than 20 if people have maids. And the same for the housework. So if people don't have maids, they do most of the own household work. The hours dedicated to household work per week go down from 60 to 20. So that liberates time for women to go into the labor market. So they are associated in this paper with this very famous title, In Genes of Liberation, the fact that progressive technology helped also free the time of women, and women could participate in the labor market. And here they're also going to look at the earnings. Now, what's happening here is that, unfortunately, Valérie Ramy is a macroeconomist. She's a very, very, very lovely person. Actually, I have the chance also to meet her in person. And she's really has this paper which is saying in her paper that she's actually saying that it's not true. So she's saying it is not because of the household technology progress, but she says it is because women had more children. Because if we take the 1900s, so maybe both stories are true. But she wrote this other paper in which she's going to show the hours of household work of women in the US over time, and she's going to tell us that the fact that the women labor supply could increase is only because of, mostly because the fertility rate changed over this time period. You know, in the past, also in my family, my father, they were 8 kids, you know, but then my father, he had only 2 kids, me and my brother, he didn't have, again, 8 or 10. So normally in the past, people had many, many more kids, so women had to spend much more time taking care of them. So Valérie Ramy estimates that this drop in hours of household production, which is really very important, is actually linked to the fact, so she's estimating that the hours of household production dropped by 38%, going from 1,900 to 2005, but however, the number of people in the household also fell by 44% during this period. Okay, and so she actually argues that the average time spent in household work has changed a little, but the main driver is the drop in fertility. So she documents that the average time fell by only 6 hours per week during the period of rapid diffusion of electricity in indoor plumbing and appliances. So she is criticizing the paper, and as usual in economics, you know, one author says one thing, the other says another thing. I think probably both are right. You know, both there was fertility decline, but these appliances are very important, because if you have to do all your washing by hand, it's going to take you a long time. Okay, so these are the historical data in her paper. So another thing you can do as economist is to collect historical data. That's also super interesting to explain something. And you have to spend a lot of time going into the archives and then harmonize the data set. So she's giving us a picture for the period in the early 1900s, 1934, 31. She's using different studies and different data sets, and she's going to document that hours spent on average per week in home production by the women are always over 50, up to 56%, 56 hours if you are in the farm, so in the rural areas, and 52 hours for women in the cities. And it's a very interesting historical paper. Then she's also looked at the different types of activities that women were spending so much time in. So she has the total of home production is very similar according to 3 different sources, was always above 50 hours. And this is averaging the period that goes for the first part of the 20th century. Then a lot of the time was spent on food production and care, cleaning the house, and then care of the clothing, so washing of clothes, the caring of the children and adults did not take so much time actually, relative to the total, 8 hours, 3 hours according to some survey. And then she looks at the number of persons in the household, which was about 4. But you see they are very small data sets. And then she's taken all these things into the picture, and she's going up to 2000, because her paper is published in the early 2000, so it's not, the picture doesn't go until the current days. And she's going to show to you, this is the hours per week of man household work that increased in the US on average, for the average man, for maybe 5 hours per week to, I think, is it almost well over 10, so about almost 20 hours of household work per week by the American men. And the American women, they do about over 30. So this was really interesting. And if you look at the average is hiding everything. So if you look at the average, you say that the average American spent the same time on household work all over the 20th century. But if you start disaggregating by gender, you see that the hours done by women drop, especially from the 1980s, when there is this technological revolution, but she says also the drop in the fertility rate, and the hours done by men increase. Okay. So, next slide is the consequence of this. So what happened to economic growth, which is in the title of my slides. And I already had given some evaluation of if we value the unpaid household work, how much does it value in terms of GDP. So we said from 5 up to 40% of GDP. And then I'm going to tell you about this study, again, by this Chicago and Stanford economist, again, for men. This study, I mentioned this at the beginning, so I'm just going to give you a little overview. It was published in Econometrica in 2019. It's a very recent study, and you are familiar with Econometrica. It's one of the best general economists, also very technical. So they have a very technical model, which I'm not going to try to explain, but what they do in this model is that they're going to look, again, at historical data, and they're going to consider the entry of women into the professions of doctors, lawyers, liberal profession, but also the entry of blacks. So they're considering the fact that in 1960, 94% of the doctors and the lawyers were white men. So all the doctors, all the lawyers were white men in the US. But then if you get to 2008, 62% of the doctors were white men. The other 38% were white women, and black men. And as there is a lot of racial inequality also in the US, the biggest part of this change is due to white women entering these professions. So, so they find similar changes, they document in all the highly skilled occupation in the US in the last 50 years. And so their hypothesis is that, given that they assume that women or black people doing these professions will have the same skills as the men, especially as they are admitted into the profession, they're earning the same earnings and so on, so it's really proved that they can do that job, then they're going to to look at the contribution to the economic growth. And they're going to find that there has been this convergence in the occupational distribution between 60 and 2008. So they're going to use a specific model, which is we call a ROI model, and with this model they're going to show you that they can explain that economic growth over those 50 years, from 1960 to 2008, 1/5, so 15 to 20% of economic growth was due to this fact that these people entered the profession. So so this paper is very much studied to show that it's important to have more diversity in the labor market and also have opening occupation also to women and not only to men, because often women can contribute also even whether they are, so there is a lot of discussions in economics of how people behave, but there is an important, this is an important paper which shows with the data that they can explain that having more women work is also going to be good for the GDP, for the growth. And of course, there is more women into high-skilled occupation, because there is the diversity argument that maybe you have heard that people can contribute. So here they're documenting this occupational wage gap. So the occupational wage gap for white women was very high, 0.6 for doctors, and the relative propensity to work. So the figures show the relationship between the low occupational wage gap for white women compared to white men, and the relative propensity to work in the occupation between white women and white men. So as the propensity to work in the occupation was very low, the occupational wage gap was very large. But then she shows the estimate barriers, so the barriers to entry into the profession, to the fact that women could not access a certain educational field and they could not access certain jobs. You see, there were no barriers if you take jobs like secretaries. But even for secretaries, there is a little decrease in barriers of entry to women and teachers. But if you take doctors, lawyers, the barriers decrease dramatically. If you take the construction sector, it's still a very male-dominated sector, but there are more women in that sector too. So, so what they find is that reducing the time, so overall picture of these three papers, reducing time devoted to household production increases the female labor supply. The fact that the decline in hours of unpaid household work also went together with improved access for women to education and occupations, so high-skilled occupation, explains almost 1/5 of economic growth in the US over the last half of the century. And so this is the first part of this lecture. The next part of the lecture is now what's happening in the recessions. So here I show to you what is the contribution of a household production to economic growth, different things that have been done around this. Now let's look at what happens in recessions. Okay, do you have questions at this stage? No. So I'll continue. Okay, so this is a paper that I announced you also at the beginning of this lecture. So it's by these three authors and was published in the American Economic Review in 2013. And what they're going to look at? They're going to look at the economic recession of 2008 to 2010. So I guess you are aware that this was a very, very strong recession in the US and that the unemployment rate went up hugely, like more than doubled, and lots of men lost their job, and there was especially men's jobs that were lost because the recession hit the construction sector a lot, because it was also related to crisis of loans in the housing market, it's called subprime loans. So the construction sector was especially hit because people were not being able to buy houses, and so lots of men lost their jobs, but it was a very, very big crisis. So what they do in this paper, they're going to take this American Time Use Survey from 2003 up to 2010, and they're going to look at what happens to household production and leisure time while this recession was on. So they're exploiting differences in unemployment rates across the different US states to pin down the effect of the recession on this household production. So what they have the leisure time. So what I'm going to find is that people were spending more time shopping, doing child care, but also education and health-related activities. And also they spend more time searching for jobs, and also more leisure time, but a huge increase also in household production. So I'm going to relate these changes in time uses to the market work hours, which are not going to be worked because people lost their jobs. So the decline in market work hours due to the recession can be explained, can be linked to about 30% of those. So if you work 10 hours less, you spend 3 more hours on household production. You spend 5 more hours on leisure time, including sleeping and television watching, mostly. And you spend also some more time on shopping, childcare, education, and health, and much less than 1 hour, so about half an hour to 15 minutes more per day on job search. Okay, so this is what they show into this paper, and the idea of the paper is that they think this can be generalized. So how do individuals allocate their lost work hours during recessions? So how do allocate the foregone market production to home production? So what fractions of the hours is allocated to job search, and which categories of leisure increase during recession? Of course, there is an issue, but of course, we saw that very little time was allocated to job search and a lot of the time to household production and leisure. But of course, this is a very big recession. So you can spend time on job search when there are some offers for jobs, but if there are no jobs offered, you really cannot spend time. I mean, you can keep searching, but there is a limit in the, well, when you find an application to apply for, you will have more job search time because you can also apply. Okay. So, so they here have also this issue, which is very important for economics. Because the big part of economics is studies the movement between changes in income and changes in consumption. So if you become a consumption economist, you're really interested in how recessions are affecting consumption. And also important for inequality, of course, issues. So here they come with this idea that there is maybe also some substitution between market expenditure and home production. And that consumption is not exactly mirrored by expenditure, because there are some things that you can produce yourself. So you can substitute market-produced goods with home-produced goods. As an example, the first thing is that if you have less income, you will probably purchase less food from restaurants, and you will be more cooking at home. Okay, so these are some of the pictures. So here is the dependent variable is the average market work time, so the hours of work per week for the population. They consider the, okay, be careful, so now you're not yet doing your dissertation, but if you take the whole sample and you start doing statistics, you're going to include people that are above 70, that are 80, that are 90, and or students that are in education. So you have to, so they consider respondents between 18 and 65. And then they're going to compare different sources, the American Time Use Survey with other Bureau of Economic Analysis sources, because what is the purpose of this picture? They want to show that the data that they take from the Time Use Survey, from these diaries, are comparable to the national statistics on the hours worked. Okay? So if you take the full population, the blue line comes from the American Time Use Survey, and this dotted line, which follows very similar pattern, comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis data. So they show that the American Time Use Survey is reliable to capture the decline in work hours related with the recession. Then they are going to look also at the picture separately for women and men. And you can see this is a very interesting pattern. I'm not a macroeconomist, but during recessions there is often this idea that it is especially the men's job that are lost. And in fact, you see that the hours worked by men, which is the green picture, decline. Well, the recession starts in 2008, so it's at the end of the picture. While actually for women you have a decline in the hours worked, but also a very faster recovery to the recession. So this is the hours worked, so the labor market jobs. It is not the household work or the leisure time. This picture is the average leisure time. So the leisure time increases for men, the green line, and also a little bit for women until they started to work, you know, because women pick up work earlier than men. Okay, so this is the leisure time, this was the work hours, the women were dropping and then picking up, and this is why women leisure time was increasing but then declining again. And here we have the household work. So here you see that the household work of men, they were not doing so much household work, but then it is increasing a little bit more during the recession years. Well, for women there is this declining trend. So of course we have seen before the study of Valérie Ramy. So you should question whether this increase in the men household work and this decline in women household work is just a secular trend behavior and maybe has nothing to do with that economic recession. So what they do in their models, they're going to account for time trend, so they're going to distinguish what is the trend over time in household work of men and women from what is the effect of the recession. And so they're going to show estimates from econometrics, so you've done econometrics, all of you? Yes? So they're going to show these estimates for this econometrics model over a different time period before the recession, which is 2003 to 2005, and 2006 to 2008. And then they're showing during the recession, the period 2009-2010, and they're going to have a different model in which they're conditioning on different explanatory variables, so they're controlling for the age, the gender of the people, the household composition of the children, and also sometimes they add weights because of this demographic. So actually very much related to the paper of Valérie Ramy as well, because they're also including weights in their estimation to control for the fact that the household, the population composition in 2000 was not the same as 10 years later, because there is declining trends in fertility and some other of these issues. So they're controlling for a lot of things, and they always find, okay, another interesting thing you find here, if you're used to look at regressions in papers, which probably you are not, because I don't know if you see many economic papers as part of the undergraduate studies or not, but you are probably used to see a lot of little stars. Okay? So when you look at many papers, you see stars. When an estimate is statistically significant, it has lots of stars. So I'm not sure if you are familiar with the fact that if you want to publish your paper in one of the best economics journals, which is the American Economic Review, like these people have done, you cannot use the stars. So the fact that there are no stars here is not because the coefficients are not significant, but is that American Economic Review does not want to have this, indeed, we thought about norms, bias, stereotypes. It does not want that the reader, the editor, the referees of the paper, the reader should not be influenced by all these stars. So you have to really be a very strong economist to read these papers, because you have to divide your estimate by the standard error to decide whether the estimate is significant or not. Of course, this is not such an easy job, but the standard error is below. So in each column 1, 3, estimate error, so all these standard errors should be below the estimates. I would see, but I don't see them. So how is this? Okay, so these are only averages. Okay, so this first table is only averages, so that's why there are no standard errors. Okay, so this is just averages of the sample population after they correct. So there are some regressions, but the regressions are just used to use the mean once you control for all the characteristics of different types of population and the weights. But if we take the estimates from the regressions, it's again estimates. So where are the significance? Here I'm a little lost. Okay, so these are estimates without standard errors. But if you take, I will show you other papers in American Economic Review where normally the standard error is below the estimate, and then you have to divide the coefficient by the standard error. Don't worry about this issue right now for my confusing comments, but this is a true thing. So if you publish an American Economic Review, they don't put the little stars. Now in this case, the specific, they didn't even bother to put the standard errors. So we have to believe them when they say the stuff is significant. So if we look at this table, you can see that people on average were working 37 hours. So the first row. They were working on average 37 hours before the regression, and according to during the regression, during the recession, is 35 hours on average. So what is the difference? Is this 3 hours difference. So if people were hit by the recession, it made market hours drop on average by 3 hours. But once you include a trend, so once you account for a trend, the decline is less than 1 hour. Then, if we are going to look at no-market work, which is the first row, we find that there is a decline in household production, but there is not really, is 0.25 increase. So the increase in household production in the aggregate statistics is very, very small, is not very large. If we look at leisure time, the increase is 1.5 hours, so it's a bit larger. But overall, these regressions are showing you that there is, even when you control for the trend, there is a decline in the market hours, an increase in the no-market work, an increase in leisure time because there is a positive difference, and then in the other activities. Then they're going to look at the same basic results, but only for men. Okay. So when they're going to look only for men, this was already for men, then we're going to look at the basic results for the full sample. So here we're going to look at the basic results for the full sample, accounting for all possible different subgroups, heterogeneity by groups, and so on. And they're still going to find very, very similar kind of results. So they're going to look at these estimated coefficients from regressions. And column 3, okay, so the column 3 is presenting the standard error associated with the estimated coefficients of column 2. Okay? So here you can see what I was telling you before, that to know if this estimate is significant or not, which comes in the second column, you have to look at the standard error. And the fact that there is no little star does not mean that it's not significant. But you have to divide. So if you have done econometrics, you know that to be significant, the standard, the t should be about 2. So you have to divide this 0.31 by 0.54. You see, it's not statistically significant. So this is going to require a lot of work on the reader. But if we take the leisure time, which increases by 1 hour, 56 minutes, you divide by 7.97, 56 divided by 7, you know that this is super statistically significant. Now, personally, I don't know why American Economic Review has this policy. It also has the disadvantage. It also has the disadvantage that if you have a very good paper and you want to send it to them, which I have done a few times, you know, you have to remove all these stars from all your tables, and you have to send these things without stars. And then if they don't publish your paper, which very often they don't publish your paper, you have to put back all the stars. So keep a copy of the tables with all the stars, but it's kind of challenging. So when we're going to read this, we have to always consider both columns, standard errors or not, and many of this stuff is significant. So you also can come to the conclusion. So which are those that I already mentioned before, that they find that during recessions, it is especially men that are substituting muscle. You see this complemented picture, because overall it's women that do most of the household work, but then, first of all, these things are changing, so women are doing a little bit less than in the past, and women a little bit more. And then also when you have an economic crisis, men lose their job, and they're going to substitute. They're going to increase their leisure time, increasing job search, but also increase the time they spend on household production. So they're probably going to produce also something. They're going to substitute private consumption for home-produced goods. And so this is the important contribution of this paper. And then this is the topic also of the next paper, which complements this, which is another paper that they also published on American, no, the other one is published, okay, wait. So the other paper is published, so this one is still the paper I'm talking to you about, but the next paper is published in Journal of Political Economy. So I show you 3 papers by more or less the same group of authors. They are not always exactly the same, but Eric Hurst is in 2 or 3, and Mark Ayer is in also 2 or 3. And so there is one, Journal of Political Economy, the last one. The other one was American Economic Review with the recession, and the one with economic growth that is partly explained by women in the profession, ICT profession, there was Econometrica. So these people published on the best 3 top journals in economics, using time use models and time use data, and looking at new topics that people have not looked at before. And in this paper, they're going to look at consumption versus expenditure. So all the 3 papers together, they fit the picture. They give you really a big picture of what can you do with time use economics, and how can it contribute to different areas of the economics. So if you don't have questions on this paper, as I have been telling you all these tips, things already talking about this, I will only read the last slide of this, summarizing, and then I go to the expenditure versus consumption. So in this one, the one that we have just seen about home production and recessions, what is the conclusion is that people are substituting time between the market and the home sector during the business cycle. And we have seen that these are mainly men. And the substitution of time across sectors in the model is consistent with the actual behavior of the households during the recession. So they're going to say that non-market work absorbs roughly 1/3 of the shock in the market work hours, and leisure absorbs 1/2 of the shock. So they're actually going to argue that non-market work has a higher elasticity to the business cycle than leisure, because they're going to say that people are still spending a lot of their time every day. Even out of recession, they spend 65% of the total time on leisure, which is something that you don't often think, because leisure includes sleep. So very often, leisure takes a lot of our time, so you cannot increase it by more than a certain amount. Well, instead, if you look at the household work, you can increase it more, because normally household work is only 11% of the total time, out of the total time allocation. Okay? So they're going to argue in their paper further that not only there is substitution from household and home time to the market paid work, but also this is more elastic than the substitution relatively to the leisure time. So they are trying to make really these arguments that there is a high elasticity of substitution between market and home sector. And that's why this is really fitting with the other paper, which I will show you now, which is about really substituting consumption versus expenditure. So, I'm going to go further into this one. And so, in this paper, they're going to focus on retirement. So really, this is not like recession, which is maybe a long-lasting recession, but you know at some point it will end and the economy will resume. But this is retirement. So when people retire from work, they are going to spend all their time at home, they're not going to go to the office anymore. This is also really important in the relation to gender norms, because retirement is especially challenging for men. There are a lot of studies that in different literature, because I'm not here going to focus on retirement, I'm focusing on household work. So we're going to focus at how when people retire from the market work, they have less income than when they work, and they are going to substitute home-produced good for expenditure, good produced in the market. But there is also another important literature which relates to gender norms and the fact that retirement is a challenging moment, more for men than for women, because the man's image is very much in the stereotypical images associated with the office. While the women are more used to, they can say, I'm a housewife, I'm staying home. So when people retire, there's also economic literature that looks at the health shocks. So some people fall sick, you know, there are, sometimes there are negative health consequences, sometimes there are not. So there is a literature that looks also at health and retirement. And health is also part of endowments, so that's also an important feature. But here we're going to compare private expenditure and home production. So what they're going to find in this paper, you can, I don't know if you have somewhat grasped what's going on in this literature. You can already imagine that the conclusion of this paper is that the retired men are going to spend more time producing themselves some of the home production and less time purchasing things from the market. So this paper has been very important in economic literature, and I thought these are Indonesian men also cooking and spending time. So how does it fit into the literature? Well, because you have literature around the permanent income hypothesis. So this permanent income hypothesis, have you seen this before? Is that people should also anticipate what is their future earnings, their future income. So if I am someone especially close to retirement age, I should be able to anticipate when I stop working how much money am I going to have, and people should save to smooth the transition into retirement. So you should not find that when people retire, for older people, consumption expenditure should not drop. But then in the practical data, there is often found that the consumption drops when people retire. So that was called the consumption retirement puzzle. There is also literature in economics that studies expenditure of households at retirement and find that when people retire, their expenditure is declining. And so that consumption retirement puzzle is actually explained by people like this paper, where they're going to tell you people are retiring, they are spending less in the labor market. It does not mean that they are consuming less. They are actually producing more. So what is showing in that paper is that all these older, retired American men are spending a lot of time going shopping for food. So they are now not obliged to go to the office. So what they're going to do, they spend hours around looking for the shop that has the cheaper price for the same quality good. And this reminds me of my father, because my father, when he was retired, I remember he was coming to visit Italian, he was coming to visit me in Paris, and we always said, but you know, why do you buy the things to this shop? I've seen that there is the other shop that is around the corner, that is like, you know, a little cheaper, so you should go, for this thing it's cheaper there, for the other thing it's cheaper there. And I was like, yes, you know, but I don't have so much time to go around from this shop, I buy this, that shop, I buy that, you know, I mean, like, I could not understand why I would buy in front of the house, you know. So this is what they do in this paper. So I hope that you are enjoying this, that you are not disappointed with these macroeconomists, because they have put a lot of work into this paper, Sometimes I have my son or other people, they say, but you economists spend a lot, actually, this is a Daniel Hammermesh favorite citation. I think it's this citation, but some economists say, as economists we spend a lot of time proving things that everyone else already knows, you know? It's like, if I show this paper to my father, he would say, hey, but what is this? I know, of course I am spending time finding the cheaper things, you know? But no, these economists, they do this in a paper with a very nice model, and it's very important to understand economic behavior and to understand things. So what they're going to do is that they're really challenging this model in which consumption and expenditure is the same thing. So in this consumption model, we measure consumption using the private expenditure data. We should also account for what is the home-produced goods and the time spent on the home production. And so they go back to this Baker contribution, 1965, in this paper, which is, I hope this, you will like it, because it's going to be the subject, but only one part, a small part of next lecture. I'm going to show you the Baker model, in which it shows you that people are deriving utility from consumption of some goods, Z, but that Z, it cannot just be purchased from the market. Z is going to be produced with time and goods purchased from the market. So there is this model in which each commodity requires some goods and some time. So especially in the household production, because I'm going to produce some meal, so people are going to eat food. You need to buy some goods and you need to put some time into preparing that. Okay. So that they're using this type of model to explain that when people retire, they're going to spend less time on private expenditure, because also the relative price of their time falls. Why does the relative price of their time fall? Because you think of the opportunity cost of time, they don't have the same hourly earnings anymore. Now they're retired, so their pension at best is 80%, 50% of their earlier earnings. In some cases, pension is even worse. So your income now is smaller, so your opportunity cost of time is lower. So you can spend less time in the market. Actually, you don't even have a choice because you're too old to work. You will spend more time in non-market activities. Okay? So the opportunity cost of time is a direct bearing on the total cost of consumption. And market expenditure is a poor proxy for actual consumption, because the opportunity cost of time drops, and so people are going to spend more time producing things and less time purchasing it. So instead of going to the restaurant, they're going to prepare a home meal. So the fact that they spend less does not correlate perfectly with the private expenditure. Okay? So this also explains the consumption puzzle of retirement. So what are going to look at the food expenditure, of course, and especially food production and food consumption. And so if you look at private expenditure, you have a drop of 17% at retirement, but actually they find an increase of 53% in the time spent on food production. So the sharp increase in time spent shopping and preparing food. So they say, really, you should not look at private expenditure alone, you also have to consider the time people put into the whole production. And so they are going to show this very, very nice picture from their paper. I'm going to show you this. So you have different age groups. People are all above 57. The retirement age in the US is around 60 to 65, 67. So you see these older workers. And you're going to look on one thing is the food expenditure. So if you're looking at food expenditure, is this line is really declining, you see, a lot. So this is the one that the people were saying, why does food expenditure decline when they should have known that they're going to have less income? So with this income, a permanent income hypothesis, the idea is that the consumption should be smooth. So there should be a smooth line. It should not be this decline. But well, there are spending less, but they're actually producing more at home. So this is the stuff that they're producing at home. So this line is the time spent on producing food. And this includes both the time spent shopping for food and time spent cooking. Okay? And so, in the end, the predicted food consumption index, which is the one they do, it confirms the theory that when you retire, you actually can anticipate the income shock and your consumption is not falling. Because you should not look at the private expenditure to proxy consumption, you should also account for this increase in home production. Do you understand this picture? Yes? Does anyone want more? No, so it's not. Thanks. So this is really the message of their paper, which was very surprising for them, but would not have been surprising for my father, for example. He would have told them, oh, I know, you know. But no, the economists were not taking this into account before this paper. So it made a big contribution to the literature on consumption and also on household production. And so here there are models in which they really estimate this effect of the drop by 0.17 in the log of total food expenditure and food expenditure at home. And food expenditure away from home drops by even more. So this is consumption away from home. It means I'm paying for food in a restaurant, in a cafe, not food to be consumed at home. Then going shopping at least once a week increases. So look at this. Is this significant? This increase by 0.17. Yes, it is statistically significant because you have to divide the 0.17 shopping frequency, 0.17, by the standard error, which is 0.05. You see? So 0.17 divided 0.05 gives you at least 34. And normally a T of student, if you know econometrics, so the T of student should be at least 2 to give statistically significant results. And normally if you look at any paper, here people would have put 3 stars, 3 stars, 3 stars. But here this is the American Economic Review policy, so you're not allowed to put the stars. So you have to divide each coefficient by the standard error to decide whether it is significant or not, and you make the decision yourself. So you're a good economist, so you can all see that these are statistically significant. And then, to complete the picture, they say, okay, so these are retired people. What do the unemployed do? So to complete the picture, they're going to take unemployed people, and they're going to look at the same pattern. So actually, in this picture, I can tell you that this is the retirement dummy, and this is the unemployment dummy. Okay, so in this picture, they're going to look at the unemployed, and they found a very similar picture. So their paper goes even beyond the retirement. It also applies to unemployed men. So also the unemployed men, when they are unemployed, they're going to spend more time producing food and less time on expenditure. So they're going to conclude also by doing some heterogeneity analysis. So you're going to distinguish, does it matter if you are a high educated or a low educated American? So here they're going to look at the unemployment results for the full sample and then for the low educated American. And actually, you see, they're very, very similar. There is a drop in eating away from home, 0.25 for the sample, 0.27 for the low educated. There is a drop in the household eats at the restaurant with table service, 0.18 for the full sample, and 0.15 for the low educated. Then, okay, so it's the fast food. So the results are very similar. So, but then I have a comment on this table. I don't know whether you have comments on this. Well, you have to know that I'm also a specialist of unemployment economics and labor market, not only on time use. So when I look at this table, first I thought, oh, so it is the same for the high educated and the low educated. And then I thought, well, how many are the chances that low-educated people are going to be unemployed, you know? I don't know. Very often, unfortunately, the unemployment is more of a problem for the low educated, especially in the US economy. Then these pictures can vary across the world. So I thought, okay, I would have liked to see the estimates for the high educated treated separately, because if the low educated are over 70% of the unemployed, this is not convincing enough to me. So actually I would like to know how many are. So they say that the total sample is 3,874, and when they consider only the low educated is 1,907. So maybe I'm wrong, because in my expectations, because the low educated are just 60% of all the unemployed. So there is also high educated people that are also unemployed, and of course this is reasonable, because now of course it's hard to find the weak points in a study by top economists that publishes on top journals, because this weak point would have been spotted before by someone or by themselves, right? So that's not really a criticism which applies to this study. So there really seems that when we compare these two columns, it really seems to tell the message that this drop in spending money in expenditure and this increase in home production when you're unemployed applies to both the high educated and the low educated and unemployed. Okay? So this was my main on this table. And so all these conclusions from this paper is that economic agents can smooth consumption by actually substituting time and private expenditure. And so there are fluctuations in private expenditures. You do not see those same fluctuations in consumption, because when you look at consumption, you also have to look at the time that people spend producing things. Okay? And then there is another issue, which is in this paper they're only studying food consumption. So it is easier to substitute between the private expenditure and home production if we look at food consumption. Because I can avoid going to a restaurant and I can buy some things and cook at home and I can save a lot of money. So actually I live in Paris and I'm always telling my family, oh, today we are saving so much money by not going to the restaurant, because the restaurants are super expensive. But of course this varies a lot depending on where people live, but by producing yourself the food at home, you can save a lot of money. And, however, food consumption is only one part of total consumption. It's an important part. So if you are a specialist of consumption, you will know now. I don't know the exact proportion. I don't know if there is a specialist of consumption in this room. But normally, I think that the food consumption is about maybe 60% at least of total consumption. So, and the poorer you are, the more important is food consumption in total consumption. Because total consumption, total expenditure data includes also clothes, includes, paying for the electricity, the heating, the air conditioning, electricity in your house. It includes buying your Hoover, your washing machine, your dishwasher. So it includes durable goods consumption. Non-durable goods includes also food consumption. So what they say is that food consumption represents only a portion of the household total consumption, but yet we know that it's quite an important part. So this paper makes an important contribution, and so that is one of my more contribution of some stuff I want to show you. Don't have questions? Okay. So I hope that you are enjoying it. If you don't have questions. And the next slide is just trying to give you an overview of what we have learned so far. So we have learned, except apart from all the things that you have learned, I hope also in the introduction, we have learned that reducing time devoted to household production helps increasing female labor supply. The fact that the female labor supply increases especially access of women to high-skilled occupation adds to economic growth. We have learned that also men's household production can be responsive to some things, and especially to the business cycle. So when there are recessions, men are going to do more household production. And also when they are out of work, because they retire or they are employed, people are substituting private consumption for home-produced goods, and those are also mostly men in those data. Okay, so what is the next slide is my paper, and I think, but I have to check the time. So perfectly fine. Okay. So, thank you so much. So we may end up also a little bit earlier, but not longer, because I do not want to be longer than 2 hours and a half. So this is my own paper, which I did with a co-author. That is a Dutch professor of econometrics in the Netherlands at Tilburg University. And what we are doing in this paper, we're going to use data on the time use of people that are retiring from work. And we're going to ask the question. So we're going to fit with this literature. Do people substitute expenditure for home consumption? There are also other papers in this literature that are following on that paper which I just presented to you by Eric Hurst. There are other authors that also went into the same avenues, that they also looked at this retirement consumption puzzle, finding that people did more household home production at retirement. There are also other papers, these are Italian authors, that are looking also at the retirement reducing consumptions. And there is the paper we saw of private consumption non-production. But what we're going to do in our paper is that we're going to look at the home production and retirement within the campus. So this is an area of research in which I tried to do, I was very interested, and I've done quite some contribution in the area. Instead of comparing just the men and the women in the data, I really take the couples. And I want to look within this couple, you know, what's happening when the man retires? Is he going to do more household work? And what does he do when the wife retires? Is he still continue to do more household work, or then he's, you know, and you can imagine already the answer. So this was our contribution. So we published on the American Economic Review, but it's called Papers and Proceedings. So these are special issue volumes of the American Economic Review that are associated to the conference. So you go to the conference and then they make a selection of the papers for these proceedings numbers. So I was very proud. And what we do in this paper, we're looking at couples that are dual earners. So nowadays in the US and in France, 70% of the couples are working for pay in the labor market. And we're going to look at whether retirement changes the way they're sharing household work. So what we're going to take is retirement age. So we're trying to find some identification as well. I promised identification at the beginning of the lecture, but I will leave this for next lecture because it's a complicated concept. But what we're going to do is that we're going to explain retirement. We're going to instrument retirement with the age, because in France, when you are 65 at that time, so I don't know if here you have heard the retirement reforms in France, but so at that time, if you were 65, you were obliged to retire from work. So to instrument retirement, we use the age of people. And maybe I will say a few words about instrumenting retirement and identification, but first I want to say what we do. So we're going to take all this data about French couples, and we're going to use some econometric approach to instrument retirement with the age. And then we're going to look at the data from the French time use survey. So this French time use survey, it's related to the period 1998 to 1999. And it's a time use survey which is done in France only every 12 years. So the most recent one dates of 2010, and they have not yet done the new one. So what we did is that the diary are collected, so the data collected for both the husband and the wife. And so we know this time use of both the husband and the wife in our data. it's very detailed, but this is the same in every time use survey. So I'll give you some more information on time use surveys in the next lecture. But they always ask people, what do you do over 24 hours? And you have to be telling them all the activities, very detailed. What is nice in this French time survey is that so you know the exact age of people. So it's not only a question of how old are you, 65, 63, but it's really which month and which year were you born. So we can really identify who is already of retirement age and who is not, even if it's still people answer the survey, but you expect that they will know which month they were born, so that is precisely measured. And we know whether they say that they are retired from work or early retirees or if they are employed. So we're taking these couples, so we get 1,000 couples. They can be either employed or out of work. So we included the housewives in the out of work. There are about 20% of them. And we took people aged 50 and 70. And then we're also checking the results when you include or not include the housewives. Okay, so these are very rough, so like the format of the table is not very nice, but what you find is our main result. So here you have whether the husband is retired or whether the wife is retired. And this is the hours of work if they're still working, and this is the hours of work if she's still working. Well, that is a 0-1 variable for being retired or not retired. Okay, and so we're going to look at the outcome variable, which is the amount of household work time. Okay, so what you see is that when the husband retires, is a house, and I will use a lot of little stars, but I guess we had to take them away from the version which was published because we were not allowed, to have the little stars. But so what you see is that these are my slides from other presentation. It's not taken directly. That's also why it's not so nicely as in the published version. But so what you see that when the husband retires, he has 211.8 more minutes on household work. So if you divide 211 by 60, it gives to you that is 3 hours and a half. So every day this retired French husband is spending on average 3.5 hours more on household work once he retires. It's a huge effect, okay? And if we look at the household work of the husband, when the wife is also retired, then it's 2 hours less, because it's 118 minutes less. So the French husband seems very nice, he retires 3.5 hours more household work. So the wife says, oh, it's great, I'm going to retire too, he's going to do all the household work. No, he is going to reduce it by 2 hours. So what is the wife? So I'm joking now, but it's at the end of the lecture, but the meaning is what we find. So what is happening when to her housework when he's retired? We found that it's still 1 hour, like if she could increase by 1 hour the household work by the effect that the husband has retired, because maybe he needs more home-cooked food or I don't know what, but it's not statistically significant, those 61 extra minutes. Well, when she is retired, she has got to do 2 more hours of household work, and he does exactly more or less the less. So you see, it's very interesting because we have this picture that increases his household work at retirement. So in a way, it complements the paper of Mark Aguirre, those authors, because they didn't really look at the couples, they looked mostly at the household heads, so mostly men. It's true that household work increases, but if we want to take the gender picture into the framework, the men's household work increases, but then when the wife retires, it increases by much less. And so this is the other picture, which is the maybe less interesting, but it's the minutes of work. So of course, if you are retiring, your paid work time is dropping by half an hour on average, but these are less interesting things on household work. You can see that there is, if people are still working, they will do less household work. But these are older people, so on average, they do not work a lot. their household work is going to drop at retirement on average by 0.36. So this is a bit less of an interesting story, because I think this interpretation of this second half of the table, it's not so nice a story, because lots of stuff is not significant and the estimates are not really precisely estimated. They are very small amounts. So I think it's because there were very few that work, some minutes. Because also another characteristics of these household diaries is that people answer the surveys about your time use both during the week and also on the weekends. So even for people that work, when we observe them on a weekend day, they don't work anything. So that's why also the paid work minutes are a nice picture than if you look at whether they are retired or not. So this is the slide of results. So these are the conclusions. However, there is also another additional kind of less positive. I mean, I don't know if it's less positive, but we also look at, okay, their household work increases by 3.5 hours, but what do they do? And they were doing gardening and taking out the dog, I'm sorry, for most of the time. So there was challenging for these Chicago economists that they were saying that they were substituting private expenditure and consumption, household production, because they were not really spending so much time shopping and cooking. They were spending a lot of time gardening and, okay, house repairs, gardening, but also taking out the dog. But I think we try not to report about taking out the dog, not to feel, so not to enter in politics of gender disputes. So for women instead, it's more the typical household work, so cooking and shopping. And so we also look at the total household work done by the couple as one of the outcomes, and we find that it also increased significantly when the husbands retire, but less when the wife also retires. So this was our paper. So if you have questions. Yes.
Well, thank you for your presentation. First of all, it was very insightful. It's not actually a question, because I'm afraid I missed my chance again. But I guess I would like to kind of have some sort of discussions from all the papers that you have presented, particularly the first 3 papers, which I think, if you don't mind, I would also like to add some more context in the Indonesian perspective, which might be different with the countries which are studied in those papers, which I believe are US and France, which are developed countries. So I think, if you don't mind, I would like to go back to that recession findings paper, because I'm actually doing like a similar thing. So I'm thinking, but I'm using like more a microeconomics approach, like warehouse labor economics approach, where there's an added workers hypothesis.
Oh yeah,
right. Yeah, I think that's exactly what's explaining what happened in the U.S. For the paper, right? Where okay, when the husband got laid off, what would be the work hour of the wife, or whether how the wives would add it into the markets and something like that. But I think maybe for those who are also interested in this kind of issue, because we also recently facing the COVID-19 recession.
Yes.
So the thing in the context of developing countries like Indonesia, the breadwinners are usually the husband, just like the theory by Becker in household production, right? The one who has more competitive advantage in the market activities should be, gone to the job market, while the one who are more competitive advantage in home production should stay, which is with the female. But the thing is, in Indonesia, when the male got laid off or lost the job, we have the informal sector or informal jobs, which does not really require demand from the firm or employer. Supplying my own, street vendors, selling meals where I have registered my business activities. So I'm actually not finishing my data cleaning yet, but what I'm seeing is that added workers is kind of hard to see, because when the breadwinner lost his job, it's more likely that they will stay in the labor market, not completely, doing whole production, like substituting into the whole production, because we have that informal sector. But the thing is, the female now has triple burden because maybe previously the female, she's working, just to add some more for the family, but now she has to add more because usually, it used to be that the husband is for a company, the husband becomes a strict factor. Also, those are the things that might be kind of different with the context of the U.S., where in Indonesia, the switching or the substitutions of the breadwinner.
Yes, no, but this is a part of this picture.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's also one thing which I think can
it's very
complement.
important. Yes, but actually it's a super important comment, because one of the issues with the unemployment and retirement is also that in some countries also you don't have a pension system, so people never retire, or there is this very much big divide, because I'm also in labor economy, so also I don't have research in the informal economy, but I know very much, I was teaching this also to my students. So it's of course in countries where you have an informal labor market and you don't have welfare, also people are obliged to always find a job to somewhat survive, so they have, we talked before, with surviving strategies. So you will not find that household production is a very good point. So we cannot expect that household production increases a lot at retirement because people are still working. But concerning the the substitution with women, this is unclear. Okay, so in that area of the literature, so now I don't know the literature for Indonesia, but I looked at the literature for the OECD countries, and even for those countries, it's not so clear. So there are some papers that say that when the husband loses his job, there is this added worker effect that the wife will go into the labor market. But there are other papers that do not find this evidence. So this is the topic of your work. You're going to look at it when men lost jobs, women are going into the labor market. We can discuss about this longer. But I think this comment is super interesting because first of all, when there is no getting out of the labor market, of course, you have to look at the picture. On the other hand, all this time-use economics started in countries which were less developed. So the first uses of time-use and time-use diaries was to be able to document even developed countries at the historical data back in time. But a lot of developing countries had much more time-use data. They call them time budget surveys or some budget of time surveys, of this combination of names, because in countries which are less wealthy, people spend much more time producing things. So for instance, all this time-use data were used to document that women had also to go and get the water from some wells. They had to spend much more time. So if you didn't have time-use data, all that work that is spent on the family land to produce by the farmers and their family, or by the girls and other household people that are spending time to go and get the water when there was no running water in the household. So the time-use surveys were very important to document what people were doing during their time. So the origin of time-use economics is not really so much a specificity of developed countries. It's really applying to all over the world, and especially the countries where you have really these big inequalities. The larger is the inequality, and typically you find it in these countries, households that are less wealthy, as I mentioned at the beginning, that they will spend a lot of time producing themselves. So I would expect that even if the people, as you mentioned, the tribal burden, so even if the people that you gave me the example of this type of households, that they do a lot of informal work, they will not have the period where they're out of work and they're going to replace private consumption, the private expenditure with the home production, but they will have all their time, they will spend a lot of time producing themselves if they can. Then there is also interesting literature there. So this is a huge literature on time-use economics. Just want to mention a paper on Daniel Hammerbush, that is one of the authors in this literature, where he studied inequality in time to eat. So he finds also the fact that in the US, the poorer households were buying a lot of foods actually from the market, but they purchase low cost, fast food, low quality. So there are also links with health. So the Chinese literature also relates a lot to the obesity, for instance, literature, when you look at food expenditure. You have poorer households, they don't necessarily gonna spend more time producing the food, they're gonna buy low quality stuff from the market, and you have links with the health issues, with obesity and things. So first of all, I think it's very general. Then I think it's true that the consumption, substitution, and expenditure substitution are especially true when you consider retirement and employment. For people that have, of course, retirement and unemployment, a lot of formalized labor market, but the big increase in female labor supply due to the changes in the household production economy and job infertility, I'm sure that applies everywhere in the world. And also when I look from the time of surveys at the average time spent by Indonesian women and men on unpaid hours of work, it was very much the same as in OECD and countries. So I think there are a lot of commonalities and a lot of similarities. And the issue of tribal burden especially interests me a lot.
But I don't know about this argument now, but this is not my argument, but
yeah.
One of my colleagues, she's a gender economist, and she said that despite the increase in the level of education of females in Indonesia, but our female labor force participation is actually still very stagnant in the past years. Well, I forgot what was the reasoning behind that, but yeah, despite of the increase in education, which I mean, theoretically it will reduce fertility and it will increase the competitive advantage of females who are going to the labor market. But if I'm not mistaken, it was because of the lack of like maternity leave benefits, like for the female benefits.
Yes, well, of course, because I mean, this is normal, like. If you want to look at female labor supply, you should consider the whole picture. So you have many things, as I said. So the topic here was not female labor supply. So if you are interested in female labor supply, of course there is a huge literature, and you have childcare, you have many things. You have also legal institutions. So like you mentioned in the beginning, women often were not allowed to work. So some of the literature in these studies also exploit the fact that women can now work, so you also have a protocol in papers. So I hope it's helpful anyway. And that you can still use the Indonesian time survey to look at tribal burden of people with informal jobs. For instance, it would be super interesting to look at whether people that have informal jobs, they do even more unpaid household work or less than the others, stuff like that. Yes, okay. So thank you so much. So if anyone also has other comments, otherwise we can close today's lecture. And tomorrow's lecture we're going to look at time use economics. And so, yes.
I want to go back about household production and economic growth. So, is it possible, because I don't know the details about this, but considering the fact that because females entering the labor market, hence there is a shift of home production into market-based production. So, is it possible that the output, it's an extreme case, right? The total output, both from the household production and market-based production, is constant, but just because it's moving from household production that's not accounted in GDP to market-based production that's recorded, it's possible that some of the growth, part of the story is, it's not really an output growth. It's just because it's more likely to be recorded in GDP. Is it possible?
No, that's interesting. That's an interesting, very interesting. It's a very interesting comment. Yes. Yes.
But do you think the researchers so far in this topic have considered that factor?
No, they didn't look at it at all. So it's a very good comment. But they're only looking at the entry of women and black people in that paper about the contribution to GDP growth. They're only looking at the entry of women and black people into high-skilled occupation. Okay. So the only thing is that if these are high-skilled people, you know, very often, even if the woman is a housewife, she also has maids and a lot of income in the household. So I think because they were looking at high-skilled occupation, it's probably not so important. But if you had a similar thing about also the low-skilled occupation, then I think that would be important that the GDP growth can go both directions. So again, it would be remain same if you count from the other. So I think your argument is super interesting, and I think that I'm not aware of any study that we did this, but I don't know how you can formalize it to a paper. But certainly a nice research idea. Yes, yes.
Not only those that are recorded here in the CGP.
Yes, yes, yes. Very interesting idea.
Thank you.
Yes. You're welcome. Okay. So do you have other questions? No. So I want to give you a break so we can continue discussions after the break if people have more questions, but I want to release the whole classroom. Okay? And so tomorrow we are going to do more example of different models of time use and application, including income taxation and time use.